Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue, and finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. Today's guest is Daniel Schacle, a Knight of Columbus and a father of 13 who has an incredible story to share, which led to the beatification of Blessed Michael McGivney, the founder of the Knights of Columbus. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bob. I'm glad to be here. Excited to tell the story.
So Daniel, you have a beautiful story, the birth of your son, Michael, sometimes called Miracle Mikey because of his miraculous healing, right?
Correct. Yeah, God writes a great story.
Let's start by you telling me a little bit about your family. You're a father of 13. That's not that common, I guess, in today's world.
Yeah, we do have 13 children. We didn't set out to have 13. I used to joke that Michelle wanted 4 and I wanted 5. So we had 9. And then it just got too big for the joke to be funny. So we quit using that joke. But yeah, we have from 31 years old down to 9 years old. Mikey's 9. We have our 6th and 7th grandchild on the way. So we're excited about that. And God has really blessed us with a lot of life in our family.
And you're a Knight of Columbus. What do you do with the Knights of Columbus?
Joined the Knights when I was 18 because my dad made me. He was a district deputy. And then I went off in the Air Force and I wasn't very active for a while. But you know what? While I was in the Air Force, I loved being in the Knights of Columbus because I could go off base and find a parish somewhere and go to a Knights of Columbus council. And everywhere I went, I found like these faithful men that I could just plug right into and feel like a normal guy and everything while I was in the military. So it was such a blessing to have my Knights of Columbus membership while I was on active duty. And then in 2004, I became Grand Knight of my council. And immediately after being Grand Knight, I became a field agent for the Knights of Columbus. So taking care of widows and orphans as Father McGivney intended. I was a field agent for about 3 years, and then they put me in charge of Tennessee. I became a general agent. And now I cover Tennessee and Kentucky for the Knights of Columbus insurance program.
All right, so let's talk about Mikey then. So this miraculous healing that ended up being the cause of beatification for Blessed Michael McGivney. Let's go from the beginning about this pregnancy and tell us the story.
I think the story really begins before we ever became pregnant.
Okay.
Knights of Columbus has an incentive trip, just like most insurance companies do for their agents that do well. And they'll take them on cruises or to beaches or whatever. And the Holy Spirit inspired the Supreme Knight at the time, I guess, Carl Anderson, to say, this time our trip is going to be a pilgrimage. So we had a trip to Lisbon and Madrid, and we had a pilgrimage to Fatima in the middle of that. So even a year or two before we got pregnant, God was already setting the story up.
Right.
And so November of 14, we found out we were pregnant, and we told the children on Christmas Eve. I gave my wife a new bag. She always carried a bag that said, these big mom bags that said Mom of 12. And so I bought her a new one that said Mom of 13.
Wow.
And my oldest daughter, when she opened it, said, "Oh, that's an unfortunate typo, Mom." That's how we told them on Christmas Eve.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then New Year's Eve, we had an ultrasound, and Vanderbilt University said that the midwives there said there's a little bit of thickening on the back of the neck and some concerning things. And so we should go to the high-risk clinic and have some genetic testing done and all these different things. So we had that appointment scheduled. And I went to a conference down in Florida, and our speaker, he told a long story about his family and bad news that happened and things like that, and then how God used that to create a beautiful thing in their family. But his message was basically, lacking the knowledge of God, we have no reason to question why bad things happen. So we found out that he had Down syndrome, and I was excited about that. I grew up in the Knights of Columbus, Tootsie Roll drives, helping with Special Olympics, different things like that. And I knew what a joy that Down syndrome people can be in families and in communities. And I was really excited that my children would have the opportunity to have this person in their family to teach them about love and joy and all of these things. It is also an extra cross too, to have someone that has special needs like that. But we're all disabled in some way, right?
Of course, I hear the same things, right? I know lots of families who have children with Down syndrome, and they tell me all the same thing. Of course, there's challenges with that, but the joy that they have about life and the positive outlook they have on everything, they're just a joy to be around. And it's such a gift for the whole family.
Absolutely. It is a huge gift for our family. So we found out about the Down syndrome diagnosis. We had another ultrasound scheduled in February to go a little bit deeper into the issues. When we came out of that ultrasound, the doctor brought us in a little exam room as they normally do and sat us down and showed us the ultrasound. And you had big areas of his body that were just full of fluid. Like he looked like a little balloon. His little lungs were just looked like crumpled pieces of paper in his chest. And she explained to us that he had fetal hydrops, which means he was just filling up with fluid, basically. And she said that there's no documented case in history of a child surviving a genetic diagnosis with fetal hydrops.
Wow.
He would end up dying in utero.
Right.
Because his body was just going to continue to fill up and his organs weren't going to develop and all of these things. And she told us that we had a 0% chance of him surviving. And so she advised us that we could terminate the pregnancy now, or we could just wait on him to die, and then we could have a stillbirth.
What was that like with you and your wife together when you heard that diagnosis? And what was that like for you? How hard was that?
It was very difficult. We were very excited about having another child. I mean, anytime God sends a new life to the world, it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 13. It's an exciting thing, So we were devastated. And obviously, it's a little bit different than just going in and saying, and we've lost other babies before, but it's different than going in and saying, I'm sorry you've lost this child. But to be told you're going to lose this child and now you're basically just on death watch, right? You're just going to sit here for months and wait for something bad to happen. And there's other families that have gone through that. It's obviously a brutal emotional experience.
Right.
I guess through God's grace, because he had all this planned, he gave me the grace to completely reject the doctor's notion that there was a 0% chance.
Right.
And so, as a lot of times we do when we're in those situations, I kind of reacted with a lot of pushback. I guess you could say I was a little bit angry sometimes with the doctor, that mainly because I felt like she was telling me that there was no hope, so I should just kill my child.
Right.
And that really upset me because I feel like my job is to protect and provide for my family, not to kill my children because they're not perfect,
Exactly. So you even felt emotionally, I guess you weren't in a situation of feeling like, oh, of course we're not going to have abortion. We're just going to wait for the child to die if that's what's going to happen. But you were even more of a space of, well, there's always hope and we're just going to live in that hope.
So I remember making the comment to my wife, I don't know who the hell this doctor thinks she is, but we've got a trip to Fatima planned and there's no such thing as no hope. For all the pain and the situation we were in, I think God gave us both a lot of grace to do what needed to be done to carry out his plan.
Were you able to get rid of this doctor and find a new doctor? Did you deal with this doctor the whole time?
I don't know if she was avoiding us or not, but we were at the same clinic, the Vanderbilt University High Risk Clinic. They had 4 doctors that worked in that clinic, though, and we didn't see her again until the birth, basically. So.
Right. Okay. So what month is this? And then when did your trip start?
So this was February. If you want to pinpoint it on the calendar, the day we got to Rome was the day the Holy Father announced the Year of Mercy. The opening Mass of the Year of Mercy was the day we left Rome.
Wow. Well, all these little things, right? Little signs from God that's just telling you that God is with you, whatever is going to happen. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me about this trip. So you probably started, I imagine, if you have friends, like we do, we probably told everyone to start praying. Probably had a big group of people in your community or your parish community praying for you and for Mikey, or no?
Yeah, we did. Obviously we were devastated. Like I said, I was upset about the diagnosis and about being told,
right,
to abort him. And my wife is upset. Now has to carry this child for who knows how long. That's going to end up being a stillbirth and all of this stuff. So one night when everybody was very upset, the best way I could put it is just having kind of an agony in the garden moment. We had planned to name him Benedict Ives after Pope Benedict and her maternal grandfather. And I just kind of went off by myself and prayed for a while and told Father McGivney, we both need a miracle and please pray for him. And if you pray for him, we're going to name him after you. So I went back and told Michelle, and she was like, no, I wanted to name him Benedict Ives. But the next morning we got up and emailed our friends locally here in our parish and asked them to pray through Father McGivney for intercession for our baby. We told a few people on the trip, like the ones we were in Rome with or our close friends, they knew about it. We didn't make big news of it when we went to Portugal. We just kind of kept to ourselves. There was a few people on the trip that knew about it, but not everyone.
Right.
We didn't want to be the front row people that got up there in the front row and, look at me and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay, so you have your trip to Fatima, and without asking your wife, which we should never do, you made a promise to name him Michael.
That's
Well, I
correct.
guess she forgave you for that, I guess.
She did. Yeah. She was all on board the next morning.
All right, well, let's go back to your trip. So you're in Europe now.
Yeah, the Rome trip was kind of on our own. There was just 4 couples, and we decided to go to Rome beforehand and then meet the big group in Lisbon.
Okay.
So, yeah, we went to Lisbon. We went and visited St. Anthony's birthplace and everything there and prayed. And we had a pilgrimage scheduled to Fatima, and it was all of the agents and everybody that was there was going to Fatima. Archbishop Laurie was there, and he led us in a rosary at the apparition site all together, which was fantastic.
Right.
And Father John Kalish told me that on the way there, Archbishop Laurie scribbled out a prayer of consecration to the Blessed Mother while they were on their way in the car to the apparition site. So after we finished the rosary, Archbishop Laurie pulled out this piece of paper out of his pocket and consecrated the Knights of Columbus, the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It was a very powerful moment.
Wow.
After the rosary, we had Mass in the Basilica. The reading of the day was from the book of John, where the official comes and tells Jesus to please save his son. His son's going to die. And
Right.
Father Kalish was reading that gospel, and we were praying really hard. And he says, "You're a hard-hearted generation. You have to have signs and wonders to believe. Go forth, your son will live." So after hearing that, obviously,
Right. You're like, oh, yes. Yes.
I've told people with the year of mercy and everything that happened on the trip, if we got home and he wasn't healed, I would have probably had to go to an insane asylum just
Right.
because there was just so many things that
so many signs that were speaking to you. Right. All right. So you come back from, when is your next appointment scheduled for?
The next appointment was scheduled for just a couple of days afterwards. I don't remember the exact number, within a week of coming back. I wasn't able to go with her on that appointment because of work obligations. So she went and had the ultrasound, and we had a different doctor that she had never seen before that read the ultrasound, and her name was Mary, Dr. Mary. She read the ultrasound and started explaining to Michelle that we got to introduce you to the NICU doctors and the pediatricians and all this stuff. And Michelle said, "I was told there's no hope. There's no reason for me to go meet all of these people." She said, "Are you the lady that just went to Fatima?" And she said, "Yes." And Dr. Mary said, "Well, with God, there's always hope, isn't there?" Because all of the high drops was gone. Wow. So you can look at the ultrasound side by side, and one, his little face looks like a balloon.
Right.
And the next one, it just looks like a baby on a 3D ultrasound, and everything was completely gone. So you couldn't even tell that he had high drops after we came back.
Wow. So within a period of weeks, it went from a 0 chance survival diagnosis to looking perfectly fine.
Correct. Yeah. And Dr. Mary asked Michelle, "What's your baby's name going to be?" She said, "Well, there's been some controversy over that, but I guess his name is Michael." So she said, "Why would you change his name to Michael?" And she said, "Well, you wouldn't understand. There was this obscure priest 140 years ago, and went through this whole thing," and told her, she goes, "Oh, I know who Father McGivney is. My dad was a knight. My mom still gets the magazines and everything." So she was excited as well. So
wow. Well, Dr. Mary was Catholic, apparently.
She was, yes. She actually showed up to the beatification. We didn't know she was coming, but it was a nice surprise to see her at St. Mary's.
Oh, that is exciting. Yeah. So she gets this incredible diagnosis. Does she call you then right away? Or?
Yeah, she called me and said, "You won't believe what happened." And I said, "No, I believe it."
I believe it.
I knew it was going to happen.
So she tells you, the bus guys must be excited, probably calling all kinds of people. What happened then?
Actually, the way the cause for Father McGivney found out about it was that after that Mass I talked about with the reading, you can imagine, we're here, we've had all this stuff happen, the order gets consecrated, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, we have this gospel reading that felt like it was speaking right to us.
Right.
And after Mass, we had a buffet, and I happened to be in line behind a guy named Tom Smith, who was the executive vice president over all of the financial operations at the Knights of Columbus in the buffet line. So I just thanked him, and I said, "I know I haven't told you anything about this, but I can't tell you how much this trip means to us. And here's what my wife and I are going through right now. And that gospel just hit me really hard at Mass and everything." And He turned around and looked at me and said, well, you never know. We're in Fatima. And I was like, exactly. We're in Fatima. So afterwards, of course, one of the first things I did was call him and say, you won't believe what just happened. We just had an ultrasound. And so he knew the vice postulator for Father McGivney's cause. So he called him and said, hey, I think Father McGivney's got a miracle in Tennessee. So that's how it all unfolded as far as the cause finding out. The next thing kind of that happened was I was being given an award and I had to go to San Antonio in May. I left Tennessee on May the 13th, which is the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima, to go to San Antonio, which I thought was funny because we had also prayed at St. Anthony's grave.
Right.
So I went down there, and the last day I was there, I got a phone call during the conference that said, Mom went in for an ultrasound and they said her placenta's failing, so they're going to do an emergency C-section on her this morning, which my plan, Bob, was to hold Michael up like Simba to the doctors and be like, how many babies didn't make it because you tell people what you told me? You know what I mean?
Right.
But God got me out of the picture for that event. I wasn't there for the birth. I couldn't catch an earlier flight. Sometime I was in the air between San Antonio and Nashville, Michael was born. But that's the next time that Michelle saw the original doctor. The only time I had seen her was one time I was coming out of the food court in Vanderbilt. She got off the elevator, and when she saw me, and our eyes met, she kind of just closed her lab coat and turned around and went the other way. That was about a month before he was born. But they had a doctor on call to do the C-section, but Dr. Mary and this other doctor, I don't want to embarrass her, so I'm not going to say her name, but they came and told that other doctor, get out of here. We're doing the C-section together. So the two doctors that ran that high-risk clinic came and personally did the C-section together. When she came in to see my wife, Michelle, all the kids were dressed up. Everybody was ready because Michael's godfather was being ordained a transitional deacon that day. So they were going to the ultrasound and then they were going to the cathedral. So Michelle had some stuff from Fatima in her purse that she was bringing to Father Steiner, to give him as gifts from Fatima. So when that original doctor came in, I wasn't there to do my Simba thing. So it was a much more tender moment. And the doctor said, Michelle, we never thought we would be here. I'm so honored to deliver your baby and all this stuff. And Michelle said, well, I'm glad you're here too. I've got a gift for you. So she gave her a miraculous medal and a bottle of holy water from Fatima. And the doctor took off her necklace and put the miraculous medal on and said, you don't know how much this means to me. And
that was the original doctor you're talking about.
The one that said I was raised Catholic. Right. There's no hope and all of that.
Right.
She keeps his side-by-side ultrasounds on her desk now. And she tells people that's to remind me there's no such thing as no hope.
Apparently she had a conversion experience, through.
Yeah, we haven't really communicated with her since. But some of the staff at Vanderbilt, they call Mikey the miracle baby. And they're like, we don't use the M word at Vanderbilt University. But some of the nurses and stuff in the clinic do call him the miracle baby they had.
Wow. So then when you talked to Tom, when did you hear from the prelate or whatever about that part?
Postulator, it was about a year later, I would say.
Oh.
The high drops was gone. We never prayed for the curing of Down syndrome or whatever. We just wanted him to live.
Right.
After he was born and they got him in and started doing his exams and stuff, they found out that he had an aortic correction or a narrowing of his aorta. Like I said, he was due in July, but he was born in May. So he was premature also. And we had to wait until he got basically to full term so they could do a heart surgery on him and fix his aorta.
Okay.
So he was in the NICU for 2 months waiting on surgery.
Wow.
And then he came home and we had him there until about Thanksgiving. The week before Thanksgiving, he got a respiratory infection and we took him back to the hospital. And he actually almost died over Thanksgiving and Christmas. Wow. Because they were giving him this respiratory medication. And apparently it's not suitable for heart patients. So I guess the doctor didn't realize that or whatever. They just kept giving him this medication and it was going downhill pretty fast. He ended up back in the ICU again. I actually called Tom Smith again and said, please pray for us. He's in the NICU again and it's not looking good. He was basically filling up with fluid again like you would if you had heart function problems. So he said, we will. And I was told that they announced over the loudspeaker at Supreme that the noon mass was going to be offered for the Schacle baby that was in the ICU. So a lot of the employees at the Supreme office came down to the noon mass and prayed for him. And right after that, they had a shift change. A new doctor came in and said, I don't like how this is going. We're going to stop this. We're going to stop this. And I mean, we had gotten to the point where they had tubes in his lungs and everything draining him. It was really bad. But after that doctor showed up, he immediately just started going the other direction because they took him off that medication. And so God probably sent him to us with all those
Right.
prayers in New Haven.
Someone who knew what to do medically, I guess. Right.
We brought him back home right after New Year's. So from Thanksgiving to New Year's, that first year was a lot of ICU trips and family separation and all that. It was a pretty tough Christmas, obviously.
So you get through that pregnancy, this miracle, and you have the birth, and then you're right back again to wondering if this baby's going to live a second time.
Correct.
What was the emotions like that time? Was your wife more in the hopeful stage there, or was it you, or were you both more like, well, no matter how long a life is, it's a gift, obviously.
Yeah. And I would say probably the greatest lesson I've learned out of this whole experience is just to trust God. We don't know
Right.
what's going on. I also didn't think that he was going to die because I thought, why would God save him and go through all of this stuff just to let him die now? It doesn't make sense, you know?
Right.
But if that's what happened, that's what happened. It's God's will, whatever. But I was still hopeful because of everything he had been through. It just didn't make sense to me that it would all end this way.
Right.
There was honestly a lot. I mean, I don't know any other families that have been in our situation. You know, I never thought I would be in our situation with a Vatican approved miracle. Never
Right.
thought I'd even meet someone like that. So it's kind of surreal in that respect. But there was a lot of just strange things that happened as time goes on, you know, just silliness making life really hard. And we actually got every once in a while, we would get updates from the cause for Father McGivney, you know. So we would have something just completely crazy happen. And we got to the point where we would laugh and say, I wonder what's happening with the cause. And then we would find out a couple days later that it moved forward. So it was like the whole time it was moving through, there was just these little attacks to try to tear us down and things. And we just kind of figured it was part of the deal when you're in a battle, you know.
Right. Tell us briefly then, what was that process then of the beatification, and what were the notifications, and when did you find out that that was all approved?
We knew a little bit ahead of time that something was going to be happening.
Right.
You know, nobody knows when. The Holy Father says, yeah, put this out today. Nobody knows that, right?
Right.
But we did know that something was coming, but we weren't allowed to say anything, which was a very difficult thing, too. They told us the whole time, don't say anything, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of like the guy in the Bible where Jesus says, okay, you're healed, but don't say anything, right?
Don't tell
Really?
anyone.
Say
Right.
anything? Are you kidding me? You know what just happened? You want me to keep my mouth shut? So we were also for 5 years trying to keep our mouth shut while this went through the whole process. We had the tribunal and all of that kind of stuff in Nashville, which was an interesting situation. And they shipped it off to Rome. And then we didn't hear anything for quite a while other than it moved to this next step or this next step. So actually, when we found out that it was released and everybody knew, I got up that morning and I had like 3 text messages from people that had seen Vatican News Service or whatever say, is this Mikey? You know, so that's how we found out that it was released to the public. We kind of knew ahead of time that it was going to be.
Wow. And so that was like 5, you said 5, so Mikey was 5 by this point?
Yeah, it was actually very close to his 5th birthday. Yeah.
So then at that point, were you asked to speak, or was there some kind of a celebration or something that you had to go to, or go to Rome?
We didn't go to Rome, but it did become kind of a circus. I mean, we had 50 people like you with podcasts that wanted to talk to us. We had the diocese show up with a camera crew and the Catholic newspaper show up. I mean, it's a big deal, you know, and a small diocese like ours to have something like this happen. And then, of course, Supreme wanted us to come up there. It was the middle of COVID and they wanted to get the beatification done. So they decided to have it in the Archdiocese of Hartford at the cathedral is where the beatification was. So we went up there for that. Another thing that just makes life hard. You know, all the COVID restrictions, Connecticut was very restrictive, and you couldn't come to Connecticut without a negative COVID test if you had been in any of these certain states that they deemed to be high risk, right? So we're going to the beatification. Tennessee's a high risk state. So we left like 10 days early to go to the beatification. We went to Virginia and visited my cousin for a day or two. And then we went up to Gettysburg where my dad grew up and took the kids to the battlefield and all of those things, and hung out in Pennsylvania for several days because it wasn't the high risk place. So we're leaving Pennsylvania for New Haven, and I get a phone call saying, hey, Pennsylvania was just added to the high risk column today, right? So he was like, don't worry, though. We've got rapid COVID tests set up for you at the hotel. As soon as you get here, you can take one. If you guys are negative, you'll be released immediately. And we had planned pilgrimages to Waterbury and the different places in Father McGivney's life, to go see those things. So we got the rapid COVID test done. And then we waited and we waited and we waited, and they ended up losing our tests. So we were stuck in 2 hotel rooms with all the kids for about a week. We couldn't leave the hotel because of the COVID regulations.
Oh, goodness.
They actually found our COVID tests and cleared us the day before the beatification. So just another example. I'm talking about, like, silly little things that just made life hard, to keep going. So
you had to live in the hotel. You weren't allowed to leave the building?
Correct. Like, we had to DoorDash meals and yeah.
Wow. So all the kids are with you going to the beatification?
Yeah, we went to Hartford for the beatification and we're there for that. One of the most touching moments. We were supposed to present a relic of Father McGivney to Cardinal Tobin, who was the principal representative of the Holy Father there. And so they wanted me to give it to him. And I was like, why should I give it to him? It'll be better if Mikey does, So there's 5-year-old little Mikey walking up there with this relic of Father McGivney and giving it to Cardinal Tobin. It was just a beautiful moment. And to have Mikey, walk out there by himself and this relic of Father McGivney to the church. It was beautiful.
That's great. Well, tell us a little bit about Mikey then before we close out here today.
Yeah, so now Mikey is a rambunctious 9-year-old. He's got a lot of energy. He's very mischievous, as 9-year-old boys are. We're very thankful that he's gotten to a point now where he understands a little bit danger. We used to joke that we're just trying to keep him alive because he would stack 3 chairs and try to get on top of the cabinet or whatever.
Oh, my.
He's very witty. He loves to make people laugh. That's how he spends his whole life, playing jokes on people. And he is just all the blessings that we expected when we found out we were pregnant. That's what he is right now. So
I've spoken with quite a few couples who have had bad or awful prenatal diagnosis, right? And both situations of miracles, that the doctor was wrong, as well as situations where they at least got to hold their child before the child died. And obviously, these are always so much better than the option of killing your child in advance, which is what our culture tells us to do. I don't know, other than what I just said, but still, coming from your own personal experience, what would you say to the audience who believes that, okay, you know what, maybe for you, right? Because things worked out for you, but why would we tell a couple who has a baby who has a horrible prenatal diagnosis and 99.9% chance they say that this baby's going to die? Why would we not allow them to have that choice of abortion? What would you have to say about that?
So that choice is a heartbreaking choice, obviously. And I think most of the time when we make heartbreaking choices, whether it's that or any other type of mortal sin, it's because we're seeking comfort and we're running away from what God's calling us to do in our life. And salvation wasn't accomplished by beach vacations and even pilgrimages or all of this stuff. That's not how salvation happened. It happened by a cross and a beating and a crucifixion. And we are called to do what Christ did in the garden and say, Lord, I don't want to do this, but if it's your will, let it be done. And then shoulder that cross, because the crosses are what gets us to heaven, not the comforts. And resigning ourselves to following his will, no matter what, is ultimately what is going to unite us to him in the end. And as Christians, we should help each other carry our crosses. If you see someone in that situation, you should be Simon of Cyrene and go shoulder that cross with them and help them. But I think our culture values comfort way too much. And I was having this conversation with someone the other day about their spiritual walk. And I said, give me one example You read the whole book of saints, give me one example of a saint in that book that walked away from a cross. Not one single one, and then we look at in the Garden of Gethsemane when Peter cut off the ear of the high priest and Christ called him Satan. Why did he call him Satan? Because he was that person whispering in his itching ear saying, don't take the cross, don't take the cross, don't take the cross, right?
Right.
We all have to be aware too, where we're worried about reinforcing others or affirming them or whatever in their decisions. We have to be careful that we're not being Satan like Peter was. I mean, I'm not near as holy as St. Peter was. So if he's capable of acting like Satan in that moment, then I am, right? This is how we get to heaven through our crosses. Don't be that guy that talks people out of their crosses. Help them. Be Simon of Cyrene. Don't be St. Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane. And there's redemptive value to everything we do. Even if Michael didn't make it, there's redemptive value in that suffering. That cross would have been redemptive value as well. It goes back to my earlier statement that I heard at that conference. Lacking the knowledge of God, we have no reason to question why bad things happen.
Right.
And we have to go at it with that mindset, everything.
Right. Resurrection only comes after death. You cannot have resurrection without the cross. Hard, but very worthwhile advice. Embrace the crosses in your life. Right. I love that added thing. I don't think we think about Simon of Cyrene often enough. Most probably do know, about that, but we don't think of it often enough. Be Simon of Cyrene and help your neighbors and friends and enemies carry crosses as well. All right. Well, before we go, is there any final advice you have for anyone out to closing thoughts for our listeners here?
Don't judge things in your life the way the world judges them. Around the time that Michael was healed, the country of Ireland decided that they were going to cure Down syndrome by aborting every child diagnosed with Down syndrome in Ireland. So they made this proclamation that these people aren't valuable and we're going to rid ourselves of this problem and all of this stuff. And about the same time, God came and healed my son and said, no, these people are valuable.
Right.
And it's really sad. Like 95% of children with Down syndrome are aborted.
Right.
It's heartbreaking. It's not easy, but it's the adventure of our life to have a child with Down syndrome. And God loves these children just as much as everyone else. And like I said before, we're all disabled in some way, emotionally, spiritually, physically, whatever. There's not a single person listening to this that can say, I have no problems, right?
Right.
So who are we to say this person just has so many problems that they don't deserve to live? Who are we to make the choices that God alone can make?
Right.
Don't view the things going on around you as the world views them. View them as God would view them. And I think one of the most effective ways to do that I've found in my life is to plug ourselves into the gospel stories when things happen and just be Simon of Cyrene and say, I feel like Simon of Cyrene right now. I feel like that Roman official that was begging Christ to heal his son.
Right.
I feel at the consecration like St. John and the Blessed Mother at the foot of the cross. The Bible is full of these things where we can live our apostolic life through the scriptures, recognizing that when I'm baptizing my new child, I'm the presentation at the temple right now, and the gospel comes alive to us more and we begin to see things through different eyes when we look at it all through the gospel.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your story of Michael and your family and this miracle, and with our listeners, this incredible, inspiring story of to embrace your cross and always have hope. And like you just said on the beginning, if we're praying with our scriptures every day, it makes it so much easier, right, to be aware of that and allow that to come alive in our lives and be aware of how it is that speaks to our lives every day. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Daniel.
It's been a blessing, and thank you, Bob.
I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website to view all our episodes at www.catholicaoc.org/beingprolife. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to being with you next time.